You know, not knowing very much about the matchups, I do think that there's two dangers, right? When you're going first, you get to your Seraph first, but you're giving your opponents more evolution orbs to give them more burn, specifically from Levi, or just kind of ramping up damage. But if you're going second, then your opponent is ahead of the play, right? And he could ramp up a lot of tempo on you. But not really sure how that's going to play out. Vetu versus Eplicas, they're going to kick off with Shadow versus Forest. Let's see how they do.
And so far, Mofu, we've seen these decks be kind of like 50-50 with each other, right? Like sometimes we see the combo go off, sometimes we see Shadow just kind of break right through the Forest deck. But I think from what we've seen, Forest winning a little bit more than Shadow. So it's actually interesting to notice that maybe Forest is just that good against Shadow right now.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really tough to call because I'm starting to notice that although mid Shadow always just seemed like that kind of consistent meta deck that's always built the same way, I'm noticing a lot more techs recently between like today and yesterday that I feel like are slowing down the deck a lot in favor of trying to tech against certain matchups, which are already so teched against slow gameplay specifically, that slowing down in order to try to stop certain combos is actually turning around and biting them. Like, Eplicas has a lot of wards in this list, which we already saw sort of just fall apart to Roach earlier today. But now he's facing a similar situation. He has wards versus Roach, but that is lending some credence to the idea of packing other cards. Unfortunately, King Elephant being on the top of V2's deck here, that help open up some non-linearity in the case that happens.
Right. And I think King Elephant's interesting. So this is kind of the situation I was talking about with King Elephant. It's in the opening hand for V2, essentially a dead card for pretty much the entire game, unless there is like this random spike where King Elephant can come down on 10 play points, something like that. But definitely not a card you want to see in your hand. And also he doesn't really have that many options. Like, he's got okay removal for this turn, but after that he's just got fairies with an Ancient Elf. It's really going to be important how he plays his next couple turns. But he really doesn't have a lot going for him this game like we've seen our other Forest players get.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because, I feel like a huge observation we've made lately is Ancient Elf just seems to be dead in hand every game that we see it, or it makes, at best, a kind of decent utility play somewhere in the mid-game, but it just doesn't close out games early anymore. We're seeing another one of its weaknesses sort of highlighted here, where I think specifically Ancient Elf starts to fail as a card if you're on the draw. Just because these 1/1 fairies are able to be attacked by the developed followers on Eplicas' side, so Ancient Elf doesn't really offer the same kind of early game board dominance that it used to.
There we go, and there's a second King Elephant. Definitely not what he wanted to see. Again, what I was talking about. But even if that Ancient Elf was a decent play that turn, the Lurching Corpse would have turned it around to not being a good play again either. So Lurching Corpse very good against that card, especially even if it does pump up huge early in the game. So just basically Eplicas turning off all of V2's options for the early game and V2 drawing into cards he can't really draw into if he wants to win this game.
Yeah, maybe something along the lines of an Elven Princess Mage off the top into Athena would develop him fantastically here. He has a solid hand to progress that kind of line of cards, but short of that, having already drawn 2 King Elephants means that he's going to be here a while. He either develops the Roach combo, able to ignore the King Elephants for as long as possible, or he continues to draw along those lines. Shaman Mage is a good example of something he needed, and would just slowly start to peter off in speed.
Right. The problem with V2's hand at the moment is that he needs to top deck every single turn consistently to get closer and closer to his combo, and he has very small control options. Dance of Death, not really good in the early turns against Shadow. Cassiopeia is going to become good on turn 6, but again, that's really only his only defensive option at the moment.
Right. So on the other hand, I think Eplicas also has a pretty slow start, and that's due to the fact that instead of really seeing any particularly strong development, he has card draw, defensive options, things like his Soul Squashers have come out very early, and we're seeing how the 2/1 stat line, a lot of people I remember, and I'll mention this every time, maybe because I'm petty about it, maybe you didn't target the most powerful part of the card, which is active right now, the squashing ability to get rid of an evolved follower. Instead they hit its defense as a stab, which isn't really where people would see the power of the card, but that means this trades into fairies. That is worth emphasizing, I think, is stats matter so much that you can have a very strong or very weak early game entirely dependent on a single difference of a stat.
Right. Not only that, I think one of the other benefits it kind of took away is doing that crazy turn 4 play, right? Where you can play another 2-drop, you play Soul Squasher, kill your opponent's, or sorry, a 5-drop or a 4-drop depending. But you kill their Evo target, and you get to smash into a 2-2 or even a 3-3, and it stays alive. Right now, it doesn't have that option. It will normally die if it wants to crack at something after it kills the Evo card.
Mm-hmm.
I won't let you get away.
With all of these developments, we've let ourselves into a pretty interesting situation. I think we see this happen a lot, where in order to fight for board, all the players today have been really just pausing at nothing to use up their Evo points, and even the smallest little swingbacks let no poke damage get through into what feel like just defensive options, because a lot of the decks we see today have pretty late running sort of win cons. Eplicas might have the first very, very fast turn here just with this Death's Breath. I think it's a very strong development for him.
Absolutely, and it plays against Cassiopeia really well, because if he decides to pop this Bone Chimera into the Goblin Mage and then play out the Death's Breath, we're looking at 11 toughness, or I'm sorry, 11 defense, and if he Evos, we're looking at 13, right? So we're looking at 13 defense against a Cassiopeia that's only going to be able to build up to 6 damage. So very inconsistent way of dealing with this Death's Breath here.
Yeah, and probably no chance of hoping that Cassiopeia just gets lucky off of that. That kind of distribution of damage across a board with that much defense is usually just going to ping each zombie for like 1 or 2. And then what does Vetu do? Like, Mahez off the top with 0 costs out of nowhere. It's like, Force really has no backup option of clearing board like that.
I think the play I would make this turn is jam the Chimera into the Goblin Mage, play the Death's Breath, and then Evo one of the Skeletons. And that would basically mitigate anything Cassiopeia could do effectively.
Right. That is possible. I think even just losing the Skeletons to the Cassiopeia is no big deal. Oh, he's going to evolve aggressively, I think.
Okay. I don't like this play as much because this does turn Cassiopeia into a better play now. Not an amazing play, but a better one, because this Goblin Mage can take out one of the 3 toughness followers immediately, 3 defense followers.
The forest is crying for help.
Fortunately, I think that Elven Princess Mage off the top is going to spare V2 the gamble of having to hope that Cassiopeia does it. He can clear 2 zombies now, and that makes this a lot more manageable. And all those... You know, this is something that I'm actually noticing, and I remember this. And, like, I haven't seen Death's Breath in a while. It's really just like yesterday and today. But Necromancy 6 is a tough price. That, even though it sort of refunds 4 shadows and that you play to spell and 3 zombies eventually die and come back out of it, that deprivation of shadows on turn 6 is very difficult to curve into Eater sometimes. Like, Eater right now is not really a particularly fantastic play that gets over anything that he wouldn't be able to otherwise. The zombie could have been very, very important for him to summon here.
Right. And this is kind of an awkward turn for Eplicas. He might choose to start with like an Andrialphus into a Soul Conversion, but that doesn't really open him up to doing anything else this turn. He could play the Soul Squasher to kill the EPM, which is not a bad play. But again, that would negate all the shadows that he had, so that Ektar becomes, again, just a damage push instead of a board refill. But I still think Eplicas is in a great situation here. I mean, he's got a ton of damage already dealt. He has an Ektar. He still has board control. I think everything's going right for him right now.
That trade, I think, is also perfectly fine to make. So Eplicas is playing very defensively here. He hasn't really seen a super strong development from V2. He doesn't know that he hasn't played a Fina or anything like that. But he sees 0 cost, he knows this is approach. And considering how he took it last time, he just develops wards on board already and says, alright, spend your time dealing with this first, and, you know, we'll move on from there. Take no risks to any kind of poke damage that might set up the combo.
Yeah, and I really like this. I actually would have liked to seen the Andrialphus here instead of the Soul Squasher just because of the defense. I think he played the Saber Altar here just because Cassiopeia is an option, and it makes it a lot less of an option once you put that high defense follower into play. And that goes along the same lines as why I would have played the Andrialphus instead of the Soul Squasher.
Right. Cassiopeia, first 3 hits, I was about to say, super likely to clear all 3 of those, just from the distribution of all this damage. Yeah, as you said, I think the Andrialphus had a perfectly reasonable line behind it. You're not really going to
it would have actually won the game. The way the damage split, it would have won the game if it was Andrialphus last turn.
Right. I think card draw also is not really the highest priority for Eplicas here, considering he has V2 pretty low and he has an Ictor in hand already. Just trying to get as wide of a board as possible to hedge against any kind of clear, like Cassiopeia could have been a big part of it.
I like this, kind of going 50-50 with this. Doing some card draw things, not pushing all of the damage of that card this turn.
Food should act like food.
And shine.
Belinus going to work in tandem with Saber Altar, and this time, very, very modest use of shadows so that Ictor is still able to clear anything that V2 puts up defensively. Not that any tool like that particularly exists for him.
Yeah, I don't think there's a good way for V2 to get around this board, and Ektar is just going to come down and be lethal.
Yeah, honestly, I think Eplicas playing that one was a lot more safe than last time, but at the same time, we see V2 in a much more precarious situation than was the previous iteration of this matchup, where now Eplicas was able to just get onto the board with a lot of wards in the first place, Death's Breath into Saber Altar. Not even having ward really was the important point, but just having high values of defense into an Ictor for a very, very clean kind of win for Eplicas.
Right. And we're starting to see the strengths and the weaknesses of playing these extra cards with White Wolf, right? I think out of the games that we've seen so far, yes, we did see King Elephant win a game. Outside of that singular game, I don't think these White Wolf packages have been doing these forest decks any favors.
Well, we did see the Homecoming just kind of pop off earlier, but that would definitely be one of the worst data points or one of the least impressive data points of it. Just drawing King Elephant 2 copies, I think, in his top like 12-ish cards. At that point, it's either develop your Roach combo or figure out a way to control the game over a long period of time against a deck and class that is like specialized to make sure that you never get a word up on the board.
Right, and as we see, Eplicas is actually like really hardcore burn rune, right? He's got the demonic strikes in his deck. He's not playing any ifs, ands, or buts with how much damage he can deal. And I think this is the really hard point for V2. He allowed burn rune through, and he's playing 2 decks that can easily just lose to it.
Especially this one. I mean, I'm used to seeing Forest go in a million directions with how it chooses to play defensively. Back in the day, there was Fairy Beast, who has mostly been effectively replaced by Crystalia Aaron lately. Sometimes the player likes to run a single copy of Elf Queen, but I don't think that those tools are often going to be enough to deal with how much damage and card advantage Burn Rune can very consistently just develop on its own. Just not even particularly going for any type of play to develop card advantage, doesn't spend time having to sacrifice or commit any resources into drawing. It just naturally does it as it goes along and deals damage.
Right. And this board is... So Eplicas did not get the best draw. However, he does have a great filter draw. So he's got 2 Witch's Cauldrons in play. He's going to start the popping next turn with a Halo Golem. And I assume he will probably Evo the ward to go extra damage face unless he draws something else, so that it can protect the Halo Golem possibly from the following turn, because that Goblin Mage isn't going to be able to run into either the ward or the Halo Golem. So he will start to pop off next turn, I believe.
Yeah, and then like outside of some tools like Sylvan Justice, I don't think there's a really big deal of what the Goblin Mage could threaten if it was trying to go for a trade here.
Right. And actually, yeah, never mind. Eplicas doesn't have an Evo point here, so won't be Evoing. But he does still get that Mind Game damage in, which is important.
Right. So the Goblin Mage clears the 0-2, and otherwise, there's no Elven Princess Mage to develop on turn 4. I think maybe it just looks like a fairy Lilac.
Yeah, I think Lilac. He could opt to bounce the Goblin Mage with Ancient Elf just to get another use out of it, but I don't think so. Yeah.
The hunt has only begun.
So Eplicas actually kind of starving for card draw here, even though he has a lot of damage in his hand. This is far from 17 moment.
Ooh, a defensive card instead of an aggressive card that pops his sigils right now. Not exactly one he wants to see here.
As we were discussing it earlier, the Dwarf Alchemist, that card in particular would be very useful for him to have.
Yeah.
Try to find something to just keep cycling here. This is not an impressive amount of damage by any means.
No, it's not. And now, speaking of that, he does like, so if V2 gets put into a position where he just doesn't really feel like it's ever time to play Aaron, it could be the case that Eplicas just draws something like a Wizardess of Oz and just machine guns these burn spells into V2. So there is still a chance for Eplicas to win this game, but based on what we're seeing right now, it's going to be tough. It's definitely an uphill battle.
Mm-hmm. The hardest part of it is that even in that scenario, I think V2 actually getting up to Crystalia Aaron in this kind of game where Burn Rune starts off very slow, there's no Magic Illusionist, there's a development of like a single Halo Golem, but there's not much damage coming out otherwise. A lot of sigils just left sitting here. Unless Eplicas, as you said, just develops into some really amazing cards with his next few draws, I think V2 just ends up with too much health advantage with Aaron and otherwise, and will just get to his plan very safely and quickly before Eplicas can take this.
Right. And here we finally get to see Ancient Elf do what it's always done before. Get that one extra little poke damage in from Ancient Elf and put together a ward left behind that you have to evo through or do something about. About time, Ancient Elf. It's about time.
Mm-hmm. One of the best Ancient Elves we've seen like within these past 2 days, and it is due to the nature of just how safe V2's spot is right now.
Right. I can't afford to give up board position to get that Roach back, get some extra poke damage in, and Eplicas just not drawing the cards he needs right now. Can't even deal with this Ancient Elf, and I think that is enough of a pushover to just close the game out. I think an evoed Ancient Elf right here to the face alongside of even a modest Roach combo is enough to kind of finish this one up.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because like Carl is not really a card that is used in the name of playing defensively in this kind of list. He is just a body that gives you a resource to use up. His healing is not very important. If anything, it just helps you in the mirror match, or it helps this deck have a little plan against aggro of a card that it can just use that has like an effective ward against them. But seeing Sue here just does absolutely nothing. Even if Eplicas were in a better situation, Carl's not the card he's looking for.
Like, the card he needs right now is Mutagenic Bolt or Dance of Death. Mutagenic Bolt doesn't even really help him, though, because it adds more damage to V2's game plan, and now V2's ahead in life.
And that sounds so mean to say, like, out of context, he's just ahead in life. Like,
right, just, he's, you know what? He's got everything going for him. Eplicas, not so much, you know.
Yeah,
the way life goes.
Eplicas just has an unsuccessful job opportunity for this Magic Illusionist, not really gathering that much of an audience here. You know, this Magic Illusionist is like the most immortal one I've seen in a long time. Like, it would take years to deal with this, but Vetu can just completely ignore it. Already, I believe, has a lethal setup in hand just off of being able to evolve that Ancient Elf face for a 6 damage.
Yeah, absolutely has lethal here. Every time, see, this is one strength that I guess we haven't gotten to see because it hasn't happened in most of our games, is Ancient Elf, if it can survive the turn after it gets poke damage in, just what we saw in this game, and has the ability to evo and go face, it works just like an Aperia, right? It's the same type of thing. Once you get that big damage spike in, your Roach combos just become super easy. So, and that's what we saw this game. Eplicas, of course, just drawing probably the worst variance of a Burn Rune deck that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, but you know, as you say, variance, it is a very consistent deck. It's just, I think any deck that is Runecraft, period, will always have some level of variance in it because every mechanic in Runecraft is highly synergistic. Especially Earthright, where not drawing the cards that with like Earthright as their as the keyword can just lead you in positions where you have a bunch of resources and nothing to use it all on. But that doesn't really happen too often just because they're played in such high quantities next to each other. It's not hard to get very strong openers. So I think Eplicas would be in much better shape over the course of many games. So definitely not what every game would look like.
This was an interesting keep. So Eplicas chose to keep the Levi and the Telescope in hand on the draw, which is interesting to me. Mostly because Levi on the draw, it's not like you're trying to play a defensive Levi here. Maybe he was just looking to have a curve out, like a 1 and a 2 play. But these 1 into 2 plays, if that Magic Illusionist wasn't drawn, especially now with the Scrap Iron Smelter, his hand's looking a lot better now. But that curve doesn't seem too impressive to me against the Haven deck.
Right. It's, you know, maybe keeping Telescope is just a discussion that involves like a series of playing the deck a lot in the first place. Because I've seen a lot of very strong uses for Telescope. I don't know if keeping it in the opening hand is that great. But perhaps anticipating, you know, I already have a Levi, that's how I'm probably going to develop turn 2, and I want to find another 2-drop. This is a really aggressive deck that has a lot of cards on curve that I could probably find. Within the next 2 draws, that'll be fine. Very, very likely to find another Sigil I can play. Probably something along those lines of thinking is what led him to keep it.
Yeah, I still think that, I think right now he's deciding whether or not he wants to actually use the telescope, because if he does, and that Magic Illusionist does get popped somehow, then he's going to be out of sigils, and that Mage of Nightfall won't be able to be played with an upside. So this is a tough decision here, whether or not to play this. This is really just feel of the deck. You have to know the ins and outs to know if you can afford to give that away.
Right. If I were him, I'd just go for it. I mean, Haven as a class a lot in these tournaments, and V2 especially here. This man plays Scripture, not Red Hot Boots, so you don't really have anything to fear, but, you know, chooses to keep it. I think just hedge against any bet. Maybe if he finds another Sigil later, he'll have this as an option for a cycle later.
Right. And honestly, if the Magic Illusionist doesn't get popped this turn, and very unlikely that it does, right? Because it's not like Haven has anything crazy that it's doing to do that, Telescope can still be used. But I think Eplicas is just really afraid of not having a Sigil for one of his cards right now.
Right. Just the way his turns are working, though, it's really interesting, because if he wants to use this Telescope as a second Sigil rather than as a cycle, he has the hand for it. He has a Mage of Nightfall ready to use this one and a Halo Golem next turn, but just the fact that it doesn't really give him the play point back unless he eats a Sigil with it does mean that he has to choose between, do I want Halo Golem next turn to be immediately active, or otherwise.
Okay, and looks like he opts for just a straightforward play. I want to keep sigils so I have guaranteed amounts of damage with my Halo Golem, things like that. And his curve is looking a lot better now. He drew into much better than what his original plan was. And this is more from what we expect. This is a very aggressive line. Illusionist into Mage of Nightfall pumped into a Levi Evo, or even possibly save that for just Evoing what he has in play.
Right. Tribunal had a very strong chance of denying a lot of damage from him, but just a medium option. At least it didn't hit the 0-2. It did mitigate some damage and a bit of a nuisance, but foregoing face I think is a pretty big deal, considering the amount of damage Eplicas is already holding on to.
Right, we might even see an Evo on the ward here, because if you consider what Beast Call Aria does, consider there's no other plays in the turn, right? It's just Beast Call Aria. If you use the Evo point on the ward this turn, it makes it really hard to actually kill that Mage of Nightfall.
It's just like back in the old days.
I agree as well, but Eplicas is going to prioritize damage here, use it on the Levi. Even just throw the Crimson Sorcery down this turn, I think, and set up the Telescope for the Halo Golem next turn. That maximizes his damage as much as possible. Assuming even if V2 gets to have his way with how he removes the board, it should still end up being fine with just how much he's got left.
I don't like this line, and I'm going to tell you why. The reason is because it's a similar argument that I've talked about in games past, right? It's about using your Evo points effectively. And it looks like he's passing here and just negating all the damage that he could have dealt with his Mage of Nightfall here. But using your Evo points on consecutive turns on targets that you want to use your Evo points on sets you up for much better gameplay than putting out 2 followers that you actually want to Evo at the same time. I feel like he could have pushed 6 that turn with the Mage of Nightfall, and then, you know, still played the same plan of, you know, playing just the Telescope out, and then just saving the Levi for extra damage next turn, because this set up a situation to where it is technically possible for all of these followers to go away, and that Mage of Nightfall to not even deal its damage. So I'm not a huge fan of the play, but I can understand why he made it. It's just interesting. Different lines of play, I guess. Different strategies.
Now that you describe it, I do see it. It's kind of similar to what you bring up when holding Dire Wolves and making sure that you have, you know, instead of playing both in the same turn, you go for a Razor Claw second, because then you can use another Evo point as an extra just burn for 2 damage. And this is a scenario with this line of play. Eplicas still gets to conserve his Evo points, but without a developed board, and this is past the point where he will probably have a developed board for long, these Evo points don't look like burn damage anymore. They look like tempo swing or tempo recover.
Exactly what I said just happened. The entire board got cleared off. The Evo point was used on a card that was in hand as opposed to a card in play. I think a play like that is a game changer, right? Like, had he just Evo'd the ward, gone face with both of his followers, played the Telescope and passed, saved the Levi for next turn, he would have been consistently dealing damage in spikes, as opposed to now he's just left with not really being able to do very much.
He shoved forward with a bit of reckless abandon there and has been tripped up onto his back foot, and now, I mean, even with Wizardess of Oz, V2 is approaching his Seraph turn pretty soon, and I think Eplicas, even with Oz and whatnot, isn't really going to have a fantastic number of targets to dump enough burn to, like, really reason 16. I mean, where I see Burn Rune really succeed in all of the games where I watch it is usually a Magic Illusionist went off and stayed on board for a very long time. It, alongside curving out some other followers like Mage of Nightfall or Carl, managed to do enough damage to where Burn was too tough for the opponent to take consistently over time, and they just spend the whole game clearing the board and then taking damage anyway until they've lost. But we see that that's already been negated here just because that play didn't really effectively use his Evo points. He already lost the board, and now he's just entirely relying on burn damage to push through, what, 16 after only connecting one hit? That's where I see this usually fall apart.
Right. I think when you're playing an aggro deck, especially something so specific like Burn Rune, I think this is kind of the case with all rune decks, right? Like ordering. You have to know how to order your plays. And this is the type of deck, especially with a card like Levi, that you can always use an Evo point on that always feels good and gets you more damage, right? If you don't use your tools effectively, it just can feel really bad. And just run you out of options, like we see Eplicas in his spot right now.
Mm-hmm. That play, I mean, Eplicas's expression is very like, what? And I think an immediate impulse would be, what on earth, V2, why did you just Themis your own bird? I think that was a very brilliant play, though. Dance of Death, as you can see, is no longer playable. He completely like annihilated the option to go for burn with Dance of Death, Piercing Rune. Even Mutagenic Bolt has been denied burn damage. He has effectively nullified a lot of the possible burn options that Eplicas could have gone for, and still would have had something to do about Master Mage Levi, or otherwise he has a second Themis in case he developed hard there. I think that was a very, very cool play that required a strong understanding of what he's going to win through, and what his next turns are going to be to make.
That's quite literally one of the most important things that I can bring up, that Mofu briefly brought up, that I can expand upon, that goes into playing against Burn Rune. A lot of their damage comes from you having a follower in play, especially when you come up to turn 6, when Wizardess of Oz is probably one of the best plays that Burn Rune can make. A Wizardess of Oz into a Dance of Death on that bird would have been a spectacular play, but V2 completely just annihilating that path and saying, if you want to play a Wizardess, you're going to give me a chance to pop all the spells in your hand.
Mm-hmm. And that also makes this next turn very interesting for V2, because he can do some very similar stuff and leave his board clear. Themis' Decree was one option. He also had the option to evolve Temple Defender, whose effect is not active on his turn, and crash it into the Halo Golem and leave nothing behind.
Okay.
And it's working out for him perfectly. The Dance of Death and Piercing Rune are just dead in hand here for Eplicas. In fact, they'll be discarded if this were to fall, or this 4/5 body were to leave.
Now, the one downside I see of the play that V2 made is that he used his Themis there instead of the Temple Defender Evo. If he's expecting the game to go this way, where he plays Seraph next turn, he doesn't have triple countdown to win immediately. And now he doesn't have a way to deal with a wide board. And all he's got left is the Evo. It could work out for him, but he's in a very precarious situation now.
Mm-hmm. One thing worth mentioning of keeping progress, or keeping track of progress, is V2 doesn't have lethal in hand if he plays Seraph right now. He only has one Star Torrent, and he needs 2 more pieces in order to really make this work out. So this 6/7 does present him with a bit of a problem. However, I also feel, this is an interesting decision arc. He can choose to try to play this in a way that leaves his board clear, but knowing he is discarding Eplicas' hand here, but then knowing on top of that, he could just have another Oz in hand, and I think he's playing around this very intelligently.
Yep. Absolutely. Another Oz can come down, and he can actually just play this slower game now. Now, he doesn't have a lot of heal. Actually has 0 heal in hand right now, so he is playing to what you need to do against Rune. And you see how happy he is when he sees 2 spells leave the hand of Eplicas. But now he's like, oh crap, another Oz, come on. Come on.
I think that's a pretty interesting Oz as well. I think he could have lined up a Levi first, and then drawn 5 cards with it. Not doing that both conserves deck size as one kind of insignificant argument, but also could mean that he's looking to play more spells at once and doesn't want to risk only being able to play like 1 Demonic Strike. But, you know, Piercing Rune, Mutagenic Bolt, V2's playing to make sure that these tools just don't affect him in any way.
What are the chances that Eplicas just Mutagenic Bolts here right now to conserve the Piercing Rune? What are the odds? Like 0? 1%?
I find that extremely unlikely, but...
I'm just saying.
Wait,
It's an
Mutagenic Bolt
option.
is only your opponent's side, right?
Is it? Yeah, you're right. Never
I
mind.
feel-
It is only your opposing side. Never mind. Yeah. So you
Got
can't do
confused
it
for a
to your own
second.
Wizardess. Yeah. I
It'd be
confused
That
myself.
would be like one of the sickest things, though. I mean, I remember one of the like first jank combos one of my friends mentioned about Wizardess was on like her reveal day was you can use Winter's Caprice, which does hit your side of the field,
Yes.
to
Yes.
turn her into a snowman and then get rid of that last words, and you have a handful of like one-cost spells, which could be like D-shifts or something. Or no,
Right.
not D-shifts. That has to be non-spell boost, right?
Non-spell boost, correct, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, wait, why isn't she used with D-shift? Oh, of course. Like,
Yeah. I think that would be insane. If you could play her in D-shift. I don't know. That deck would mutate a lot though, because you can't have a high hand size. I don't know. It'd be interesting.
the pretty tough spot that Veach is actually in. Though he's been playing pretty brilliantly so far, he is actually pretty much out of options. He's played to make sure he
Right.
doesn't get the board, and we see how how that kind of messes with him. He has to use his combo pieces to maintain his life total, but in doing so, he moves himself further and further away from actually... Eplicas is so emotive, but, you know, I'm feeling the same way. He uses his combo pieces, he doesn't have a Seraph on board, it just progresses Eplicas towards being able to win despite being played around so diligently.
I think it was quite literally the one turn that he used the Themis' Decree instead of evoing the Temple Defender. Not saving the wide board clear is exactly the situation that he's losing to right now. He has no way to clear a wide board after playing absolutely perfectly against Burn Rune. He threw away his one piece of removal that could have won him this game.
Right. I mean, Ancient Lion Spirit in hand as well.
Whew, Eplicas is sweating after that one.
He's so I
I
said
am
I'm
awake now."
awake now.
I'm awake. Oh my god.
That was quite possibly one of the most intense matches that we've had between Burn Rune and Seraph. I think I think Vetu was on the right game plan,